The maid's toddler destroyed the billionaire's wedding cake. What she found inside stunned all. The wedding was perfect. The flowers, the music, the guests in their finest clothes. Everything looked like a fairy tale. And then a 3-year-old girl with chocolate on her fingers reached up and grabbed the bottom tier of a 6-foot wedding cake worth $12,000. The whole thing came crashing down in slow motion. Gasps filled the ballroom. The little girl stood in the middle of the wreckage, wide-eyed and trembling. But when the cake hit the marble floor and split wide open, what tumbled out from inside stopped every single person in that room cold. Because what was hidden in that cake was never meant to be found. Not today. Not ever. Welcome back, everyone. You are in the right place for stories that will move your heart, challenge your thinking, and remind you what truly matters in this life. Today's story is filled with raw emotion, shocking twists, powerful life lessons, and moments that will genuinely take your breath away. Before we dive in, drop a comment right now and tell us, which country are you watching from? We love hearing from our incredible community. Now let's get into this story. Trust me, you will not want to look away. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones hiding the most. Have you ever trusted someone completely, only to find out they were not who you thought they were? Nathan Caldwell had built everything from nothing. At 35 years old, he was the kind of man people wrote articles about. Born in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, he had worked his way through college on a partial scholarship and 2 part-time jobs, built his first tech company in a 1-bedroom apartment, and by the time he was 30, had turned that idea into a platform worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Forbes had featured him twice. He drove a modest car when he was alone, gave generously to local charities, and still called his mother every Sunday morning without fail. People who knew Nathan well said the same thing about him. He was real. In a world full of performance and pretense, Nathan Caldwell was genuinely, uncomplicatedly real. But even the most grounded man can be blinded by love. Her name was Vanessa Hartley, 29 years old. Originally from Charlotte, North Carolina. She had the kind of presence that made people stop mid-sentence. Polished, graceful, articulate. She could walk into any room and make it feel like she had always belonged there. She laughed at the right moments, said the right things, and had a gift for making whoever she was speaking to feel like the most important person in the world. Nathan had met her at a charity gala in downtown Chicago 14 months ago. She had been standing near the silent auction table, studying a painting with what seemed like genuine appreciation. He had walked over. They had talked for 3 hours straight. He thought it was fate. What he did not know was that Vanessa had researched the gala's guest list 2 weeks before the event. She had identified Nathan Caldwell specifically. She had read every article, studied every interview, memorized every detail. She had positioned herself near that painting because she knew Nathan had donated it. None of that was fate. It was strategy. But Nathan had no way of knowing that. He only knew that she made him feel something he had not felt in years. Seen, understood, at peace. Within 6 months, he had introduced her to his friends. Within 9 months, she had moved into his home in Lincoln Park, Chicago. And 11 months after that charity gala, Nathan got down on one knee at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan and asked Vanessa Hartley to be his wife. She said yes before he finished the sentence. Now, 3 months later, the wedding was 4 weeks away. Nathan's home was large but warm. He had always insisted on that. Despite the high ceilings and the marble floors and the chef's kitchen, there were family photos on the walls, mismatched coffee mugs in the cabinet, and a dog named Biscuit who shed on everything and was completely untrained. The house felt like someone actually lived there, which was rare for a place that expensive. Margaret Owens had been working as Nathan's housekeeper for 2 years. She was 44 years old, soft-spoken, and deeply hard-working. She had taken the job after her husband passed away unexpectedly from a heart condition, leaving her with their daughter, Lily, and a stack of medical bills she was still slowly paying down. Lily was 3 years old. Bright, curious, with big brown eyes that always seemed to be studying something with intense concentration. Because Margaret could not always afford childcare on short notice, Nathan had told her, firmly, kindly, without any hesitation, that Lily was welcome in the house whenever necessary. He had even set up a small corner of the living room with a basket of toys and picture books specifically for her visits. Vanessa had never said anything directly about this arrangement. But the look on her face when Lily toddled through the front door was something that Margaret had noticed early and never forgotten. It was not hostility exactly. It was something colder than that. Indifference mixed with mild irritation, like a person who had spotted a stain on an expensive tablecloth. Margaret noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing because she needed this job and because Nathan was genuinely kind, and because she told herself she was probably reading too much into things. She tried to believe that. But 4 days before the wedding, something happened that made it much harder to keep believing. Nathan had stepped out to take a call in his home office. Vanessa was in the kitchen, and she did not realize Margaret was in the hallway just outside, folding linens from the dryer. Vanessa was on her phone, speaking in a low voice that was completely different from the warm, musical tone she used around Nathan. Clip, flat, businesslike. I told you, Michael, it's handled. For weeks and it's done. The prenup has a clause. If he initiates contact with outside financial advisors after the wedding, it could complicate things, so just wait. I said wait. I don't care about the charity thing. That's $50,000 he could be putting somewhere useful. Once we're married, those decisions go through me. Another pause. Because I'm good at this. Just trust me. Then the sound of the refrigerator opening, and the cheerful, lilting voice Vanessa always used with Nathan drifting back like a costume she had just slipped on. Babe, do you want sparkling water or still? Margaret stood in the hallway, the folded towel in her hands, her heart beating very fast. She did not move for a long moment, because in that moment, Margaret Owens understood something with sudden, terrible clarity. The woman about to marry Nathan Caldwell did not love him at all. Knowing the truth and being able to prove it are two very different and painful things. If you overheard something that could hurt someone you cared about, but you had no proof, what would you do? Margaret did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark of her small apartment in Wicker Park, Lily breathing softly in the next room, and turned the conversation over and over in her mind. She heard it again and again. Once we're married, those decisions go through me. And each time it made her stomach tighten. She thought about going to Nathan directly. She imagined sitting across from him, telling him what she had heard. She played out the conversation in her head a dozen different ways. And in almost every version, it ended the same. Nathan would be confused. He would ask Vanessa. Vanessa would deny it, pivot beautifully, perhaps even cry. And Margaret, the housekeeper, the employee, the woman who had been hired to clean floors, would look like someone stirring up trouble before her employer's wedding. She had no recording. She had no proof. She had nothing but a second-hand fragment of a phone conversation. And Vanessa would know exactly how to use that. So Margaret waited. She watched. She paid close attention to every interaction in that house, storing details quietly the way she had always done, because that was how she had survived the hardest years of her life. By paying attention, by staying calm, by trusting that the truth had a way of moving toward the surface on its own. The week before the wedding, the energy in the house shifted. Caterers came and went. A wedding planner named Donna made daily visits with thick binders and a permanently furrowed brow. The ceremony was going to be held at the Langham Hotel in downtown Chicago, a venue that cost more to rent for one weekend than Margaret made in 3 years. 12,000 guests. Sorry, 212 guests, Nathan had joked when he mentioned the number, catching himself with that familiar self-conscious laugh he had when things got too extravagant for his comfort. Vanessa had chosen everything. The $12,000 cake from an exclusive Chicago bakery. The imported flowers. The custom-designed crystal centerpieces. Every detail was flawless and expensive and chosen with the precise, practiced eye of someone who had been planning for this kind of event for a very long time. Nathan had signed every check without complaint. He trusted her completely. That trust made Margaret ache. On the Wednesday before the wedding, Nathan came into the kitchen where Margaret was reorganizing the pantry, and he sat down at the island counter the way he sometimes did when he wanted to talk. Not in a boss-to-employee way. Just the way a genuine person sits down and talks to another genuine person. "You okay, Margaret?" he asked. Just like that. Direct and warm. She looked at him. 35 years old, kind eyes. A man who had made hundreds of millions of dollars and still personally fed Biscuit every morning because he said it was good for him to do at least one small thing daily that had nothing to do with business. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." He nodded, but he didn't fully believe her, she could tell. He had good instincts. It was one of the reasons he had succeeded. But he had a blind spot, and her name was Vanessa. "You've been quiet this week," he said. "Pre-wedding energy," Margaret said carefully. "A lot happening." He smiled. "Tell me about it." He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee mug in his hands. "You know, Margaret, I keep thinking about my mom. She always said, be careful what you build your life around. Because whatever it's built on determines whether it lasts." He paused. "She likes simple things. Good people. Honest conversations. She would have..." He stopped. "What?" Margaret asked softly. "She would have wanted me to make sure I was getting married for the right reasons." He laughed quietly, almost embarrassed. "Sorry. That's too much for a Wednesday morning." "No," Margaret said. "It isn't." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood up, nodded once, and carried his coffee toward the hallway. Margaret turned back to the pantry shelf. Her hands weren't quite steady. She made a decision then. She could not go to Nathan with words. But if the truth was there, if it was real, it would eventually show itself. She just had to stay close. She just had to keep watching. That same afternoon, Vanessa received a delivery. A large, sealed box from the bakery. A final structural component for the wedding cake that needed to be stored in the house's temperature-controlled pantry overnight before being transported to the venue on Friday. Margaret signed for it. Vanessa examined the box briefly, then went back to a phone call. "Just put it in the back pantry," she said without looking up. "And make sure Lily doesn't go anywhere near it." It was the way she said Lily, with that particular flatness, that lodged itself in Margaret's chest like a splinter. "Of course," Margaret said. She placed the box carefully in the pantry. She noticed it was heavier than it should have been for a decorative cake component. She noticed that the seal on one side had been opened and retaped. She told herself it was nothing. She closed the pantry door. She would not open it again until the morning of the wedding, when everything changed. The most important truths have a way of being revealed at exactly the wrong, or exactly the right moment. Do you believe that dishonesty always comes to light eventually, no matter how carefully it's hidden? The morning of the wedding arrived clear and cold, the way Chicago mornings sometimes do in October. A pale blue sky, sharp air, the city feeling alert and awake. The Langham was already alive with activity by 7 in the morning. Florists, sound technicians. The wedding planner Donna, moving at a pace that suggested she had consumed an alarming amount of coffee. Margaret had been asked to bring Lily and come to the hotel by 9 to help with final household errands, transporting Nathan's personal items, overseeing the delivery of the pantry box to the bakery team. It was not unusual. In the weeks before the wedding, Vanessa had quietly restructured Margaret's duties to include more personal assistant tasks, a shift that Margaret had accepted without complaint. She brought Lily in a little yellow dress with white tights, her dark hair in 2 pigtails. Lily was delighted by everything: the chandeliers, the flower arrangements, the shining floors. She held Margaret's hand and pointed at things with the focused urgency of someone cataloging wonders. The bakery team arrived at 10 to begin assembling the cake in the private reception ballroom. The $12,000 masterpiece, 6 tiers of hand-painted white fondant with gold leaf detailing and sugar flowers, was assembled piece by piece with the precision of engineers. Margaret stood to the side, watching, marveling a little despite herself. She had set Lily down near the door with a small bag of quiet toys, a soft doll, some board books, a container of chunky crayons. Lily was content. Margaret began reviewing a checklist on her tablet. 20 minutes passed. Then came the sound that would change everything. A small pattering of feet. A curious silence. And then, so fast that no one had time to process it, the unmistakable sound of a 3-year-old discovering that the bottom tier of a 6-foot cake had a ledge that was exactly at her height, and that it was interesting, and that things that are interesting should be touched, and that things that are touched sometimes. The cake came down. In a hotel that had hosted world leaders and movie premieres and the kind of events that required security clearances, no sound had probably ever cut through the air quite like that. The crash. The collective gasp. The bakery team frozen. Donna the wedding planner making a sound like a kettle boiling. And in the middle of the wreckage, Lily, standing very still, both hands covered in frosting. Eyes enormous. Her lower lip beginning to tremble. Margaret rushed forward, heart hammering. Lily! But she stopped, because the cake had split apart. Not just collapsed, but split cleanly open at one of the inner tiers, the way something splits when there is something rigid inside it. And there, in the rubble of $12,000 of destroyed pastry, something had fallen out. Small bundle. Tightly wrapped in plastic wrap and sealed with clear tape. Rectangular. Approximately the size of a brick. Margaret stared at it. Then she looked up. The bakery team was frozen. Donna had gone very still. 3 hotel staff members near the door were looking at each other with wide eyes. One of the catering managers, a heavy-set man named Roy who had been in the hotel business for 20 years, stepped forward and crouched beside the wreckage. He looked at the bundle for a long moment without touching it. Then he stood up and took out his phone. "I need to make a call," he said quietly. Margaret picked up Lily, who was now crying softly. Not hurt, just scared by the noise and the commotion. She held her daughter close and stepped back against the wall, and her mind was racing, pulling up every fragment she had stored over these past weeks like pieces of a puzzle she had been carrying without knowing what image they formed. The heavier-than-expected box. The retape seal. The phone call, "Just wait, once we're married those decisions go through me." The name Michael, whoever Michael was. The prenup clause. $50,000 he could be putting somewhere useful. She looked at the bundle on the floor. She thought about Vanessa examining that box. Briefly. Without concern. Just put it in the back pantry. And then she understood. Vanessa had not known what was in that cake component box. Vanessa had not put that bundle in the cake. Someone else had. Someone who had access to the bakery. Someone who had used the wedding, with all its chaos and movement and the perfect cover of a grand event, to move something. And someone had chosen Nathan Caldwell's wedding cake as the vehicle, because the sealed box would be delivered directly to a high-end hotel without inspection, signed for by household staff, carried inside without question. Nathan's wedding had been used, without his knowledge, without his consent, as a delivery route for something that should never have been inside a cake. The question that turned Margaret cold was simple and terrible. Did Vanessa know? Within 20 minutes, two men in plain clothes who introduced themselves quietly to hotel management had arrived in the ballroom. They moved calmly and spoke in low voices. Roy, the catering manager, stood to one side. Donna had stopped making sounds entirely. Margaret sat in a chair near the wall with Lily in her lap, who had stopped crying and was now eating a cracker from the snack bag with total composure, as if the entire situation was perfectly ordinary. One of the plainclothes men, older with a steady, unhurried manner, came and sat down across from Margaret. "Ma'am," he said, "I understand you work for Mr. Caldwell. Can you tell me about the delivery yesterday? Who signed for the box?" "I did," Margaret said. He nodded. "And did you observe anything unusual about the box?" Margaret took a slow breath. "Yes," she said. "I did." And she told him everything. The weight, the retape seal. And then, carefully, clearly, because she had been carrying it long enough, she told him about the phone call she had overheard. The name Michael. The prenup clause. The words "once we're married, those decisions go through me." The man listened without interrupting. He wrote nothing down in her presence. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Owens," he said, "you've been very helpful. I'm going to ask you to stay available today. Can you do that?" "Yes," Margaret said. He looked at Lily. Something shifted briefly in his expression. Something almost like relief. "Good thing she likes cake," he said quietly and stood up. "When the truth finally arrives, it doesn't knock gently. Takes the door off the hinges. What would you do if you found out someone you loved was about to walk into a trap they couldn't see coming?" Nathan was in the hotel's bridal suite anteroom, a small, elegant space where grooms apparently waited while the world arranged itself, when his phone rang. He did not recognize the number. He almost let it go to voicemail. Wedding morning, 200 guests arriving, Vanessa getting her hair done 4 floors up. This was not the moment for unknown callers. He answered anyway. The voice on the other end was calm and professional and said things that did not, at first, seem connected to anything real. Then they began to connect. Then Nathan sat down on the edge of the antique settee in that small room and listened without speaking for a very long time. When the call ended, he sat with the phone in his hands and looked at the wall for approximately 3 minutes. Then he stood up and asked a hotel staff member to find Margaret Owens. She came to the room with Lily still on her hip. Nathan was standing by the window, his jacket on, his tie not yet tied, looking like a man who had just had the ground rearranged beneath him but was still, somehow, standing upright. He looked at Margaret when she came in. He looked at Lily. He looked at the frosting still faintly visible in Lily's hairline where her pigtail had caught the edge of the crash. "The detective told me what you said," he told Margaret. His voice was very even. "About the phone call. About Michael." Margaret nodded. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" She met his eyes. "I had no proof. I had her word against mine and you were." She stopped. "I didn't want to hurt you based on something I couldn't prove. Thought I was wrong. I wanted to be wrong." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "You weren't wrong," he said. He sat down heavily in the chair. Biscuit wasn't here to press against his leg, which he probably would have appreciated. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Michael Trent. He's a money broker. Used to work in high-end financial crime. I've never met him in my life." He paused. He was apparently using my wedding, to move something through the hotel. He had a contact at the bakery. The contact got nervous and disappeared last night. That's how they picked it up so fast. Does Vanessa? Margaret began carefully. I don't know yet. He said it quietly, and there was something in his voice that was more painful than anger. They're looking at that. Whether she knew. Whether she's connected to Trent directly. He stopped. She knew his name. Obviously. The room was quiet. Outside, somewhere in the hotel, 200 people were taking their seats, checking their programs, adjusting their flowers, waiting for a wedding to begin. Nathan looked at Lily. She had fallen asleep against Margaret's shoulder with a sudden, total commitment that only toddlers manage, the cracker still half clenched in her fist. Something moved across his face, quiet and complicated and deeply human. She never liked Lily being in the house, he said. I noticed. I told myself it didn't matter. He paused. It mattered. Margaret didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. I built this company by trusting my instincts, Nathan said softly, more to himself than to her. I ignored them completely with her. I wanted so badly for it to be real. A long breath. My mother always said, watch what people do, not what they say. Watch who they treat well when there's nothing in it for them. He looked at Margaret. You protected me, he said. You didn't have to. You had every reason to stay quiet and keep your job and let someone else figure it out. But you came forward anyway. Margaret shifted Lily gently. You set up a basket of toys for my daughter, she said simply. Because you're a good person. Good people deserve to know the truth. Nathan nodded once. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked to the door. What would you do if you were in his place? He had a wedding to call off and guests to address, and a very difficult conversation ahead of him. He was going to walk into it with his eyes open and his spine straight, the way he had walked into every hard thing in his life. And for the first time in 14 months, Nathan Caldwell was going to trust himself again. After the hardest days come the moments that remind you why it was worth it to hold on. Do you believe that when one door closes painfully, it sometimes opens to something truer and better? Vanessa Hartley was in the middle of having the final pins placed in her hair when the knock came at the bridal suite door. She was not expecting what came through it. The conversation was brief, direct, and witnessed. She denied several things rapidly. She cried in the particular way she had always cried, beautifully without ruining her eye makeup. She said Nathan was making a terrible mistake. She said she loved him. She said it several more times, each iteration slightly more carefully constructed than the last. Nathan listened politely. He was kind about it because that was who he was. He did not shout. He did not accuse beyond what he knew. He simply told her that the wedding would not be proceeding, that her connection to Michael Trent was being reviewed, and that he hoped she would be honest with the people asking her questions. The investigation that followed over the next several weeks determined that Vanessa had not known about the specific contents of the package. But she had known Michael Trent. She had introduced him to the bakery's ownership group. She had facilitated the access that made the delivery route possible, while maintaining careful distance from the specifics, the way someone does when they want plausible deniability more than genuine innocence. Her careful architecture of self-protection, the same precision that had built her relationship with Nathan, ultimately worked against her. Because it demonstrated deliberate calculation rather than simple ignorance. The financial manipulation she had been planning through the prenup clause, the advice of outside professionals, the rerouting of charitable funds, those threads unraveled too slowly in the months that followed. She did not face criminal charges in the end. But she faced something she had perhaps never genuinely prepared for. Consequences without a net. The social world she had cultivated so carefully through Nathan's connections evaporated. The influence she had positioned herself to inherit dissolved. She had spent 14 months building something on a foundation of performance, and when the performance ended, there was nothing underneath. She moved back to Charlotte. She was 30 years old, and she had to decide, perhaps for the first time, who she actually was when no one was watching. Nathan took 3 months away from everything. He went to see his mother in Columbus. He sat on her back porch and drank coffee and let her talk, which she did at length and with great feeling as she always had. He came back to Chicago steadier. He gave a significant donation, not $50,000 but considerably more, to 3 charitable organizations he had been deferring since Vanessa had expressed her private opinions about philanthropy. It felt, he said later, like clearing a debt he hadn't known he'd been carrying. He kept Biscuit. Obviously. He called Margaret about 6 weeks after the wedding day. That wasn't. I want to offer you something, he said, and I want you to know you can say no. He had been consulting with the board of his foundation, a charitable arm of the company that had been underfunded and underorganized for years. He needed someone to manage the household and logistical operations of the foundation's Chicago office. It was a better title, better pay, full benefits, and flexible hours that would accommodate Lily's school schedule once she started pre-K in the fall. Nathan, Margaret started. You see things clearly, he said. You're honest even when honesty costs you something. Those are not common qualities. I'd rather have you in a role where they're actually useful. Margaret looked across her small apartment at Lily, who was on the living room rug, deeply focused on trying to teach her stuffed elephant to stack blocks. Okay, she said. Yes. Lily started the job with her, of course. Because the new office had a wonderful corner with good light, and Margaret furnished it with a basket of toys and a small bookshelf of picture books. On the first day, Nathan stopped in the doorway of that corner and looked at it for a moment. Looks familiar, he said. I learned from the best, Margaret told him. He laughed, the real one, the one that reached his eyes. The one that had nothing performed about it at all. The moral of this story is not that money is bad or that love is impossible. It is something quieter and more durable than that. It is that the people who see you clearly, the ones who treat you with genuine care when there is nothing in it for them, who tell you the truth when silence would have been easier, who show up with honesty because that is simply who they are, those are the people worth building your life around. Not the ones who perform care. The ones who practice it. And sometimes, in the middle of a ruined $12,000 cake on a marble floor, with frosting in her pigtails and a cracker in her fist, a 3-year-old girl with curious brown eyes will crack something open and let the light in. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the importance of honesty, genuine kindness, and surrounding yourself with people who are truly real, then please hit that like button right now. Means more than you know. And if you haven't subscribed yet, join our family. We tell stories here that matter, stories that stay with you. Drop a comment below and tell us, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Share this with someone who needs to hear a story about truth today. We'll see you in the next one.